Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show for you planned out today. I am stoked. We got Kevin returning. We got Evan here on his first go. We're going to be talking ultra endurance. I am stoked. Now, while I am stoked, y'all should be too. Do the things like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff. Get your emails whenever we go live, which is, of course, Fridays for The Collective and Wednesdays for The Gold Mine. If you have any thoughts, questions, comments, anything at all, put them up in the comment section and we can engage those throughout the show. Other than that, I'm pretty stoked for this. So let's get some intros out of the way and then we can jump into the convo. Kevin, we're going to hit you first. 10, 15 seconds. Who are you? Where you come from? All that good stuff. Giver.
Right on. Yeah, my name is Kevin Barata. I'm from Abbotsford, British Columbia. I'm married, three young, or not young girls, but three teenage girls. And I'm a police officer with the RCMP. Been employed there for almost 22 years now.
Bam. And he's got a fantastic mustache as well. So just love it. Evan, how about yourself?
Yeah, so Evan Birch. I live in Calgary, Alberta. Married. I have two daughters, age 7 and 9. Keep me on my toes. And I'm an ultra runner, coach, and mental health advocate.
Bam. I like it. Nice and tight. Sean, how's the mountains treating you?
Things are good here. Looking forward to this conversation. I do love ultra endurance, all things. So we'll see what we get into today.
Yeah, I am stoked. So I have a question right off the bat, and it's the big question. It is, what have your ultra endurance endeavors taught you about your mental and physical limits? Let's start right there, right off the hop. Kevin, you're on top. Start with you. Thoughts?
What has it taught me about my limits? Well, it's definitely taught me that I think we're all capable of way, way more than we ever think we are. I know it's cliche to say that, but living it and experiencing it is pretty cool to see firsthand. Like when you tackle a big goal, a scary goal, and then you overcome it, it really kind of defines what limits are. Because we all kind of have these limits in our brain of what is possible, what is impossible, and it's a normal thing. But when you're out there and you're overcoming them, and then you actually expand those limits, that to me has kind of been the most profound experience that I've had with ultra endurance sports.
I love that. That's a great start. Evan, you got thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, if you were to ask anybody when they got into this sport, if they would have chosen this as their sport, I think all of us would have different answers. It's definitely, I've been trail running for over 20 years, longer distances now for probably the last 8 years. And really, it's kind of shown me, I got into these longer distances from not a healthy place, I'll say, from a very avoidance distraction piece. Much like Kevin, I've been in emergency services for better part of 2 decades. So for me, it was a distraction at first. And really what it's taught me is I don't need to do these distances to escape from anything or avoid anything or be distracted by anything. I quite literally am now doing these distances to prove to myself, like, what am I truly capable of? Because I don't think anybody can run these distances and not exceed within their day-to-day life. I think there's something about, being in your head for that long of a period of time that not a lot of people ever give themselves the opportunity to do anymore. Whether that's being distracted with music or any of those things. But I think for me, the biggest piece and the learning that I've taken from this is you don't have to be broken to do the distances and do the things that we're doing. You can come at it from a very happy, joyful, self-love, very centered place and do extremely well and push yourself further than you ever thought you could.
I'm liking where this is going, Sean. You got any thoughts?
I do. So I relearned some things by entering into 24-hour solo mountain bike racing. So my first career in the military, I did some pretty hard things. I did some ultra endurance related things, but throwing on a massive rucksack and walking for days through the 24 hours a day for days, that's hard. But it's not a distilled or a refined sense of suck like 24-hour solo mountain bike racing is, because it's just you, unlike my military career where it was small team based, or if I was independent operating, there was always something else on the go that kind of interacted, or I'll loosely term it as interfered, with the purity of the suffering that ultra endurance racing can bring. Now, when I say suffering or the purity of suffering, I mean that's for everyone to decide how much they want to engage in that in the particular sport. And I think that no one has to go so deep into it that they're feeling a super intense sting, but that's kind of what I prefer. I prefer to feel the fullness of the moment, which means that I go hard, I go all in on these kind of things, which I couldn't do to the purity or to the I suppose the lack of distractions sense of hardcore ultra endurance individual effort. So much like the fellas when they were out there running by themselves, and I know they had a support team like most ultra endurance racers have some level of support. But when you're out there by yourself with no music and nothing else except putting one foot in front of the other, there's a purity to it that is hard to get anywhere else other than these solo efforts. So I'll leave it at that for now and see where we go.
I like the fact that it's all very personal, right? Like everybody kind of comes at it from their own angle. They all kind of reach the same goal, but to your point, the purity is in yourself and how you manage that. Kevin, you got any additional thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, I just want to definitely I agree with that. There aren't many things that you can, like, for example, like these ultra endurance races, whether it's a 24-hour effort or a 200-mile race, where you're singularly focused on one thing, and that's just putting one foot in front of the other until you finish. There's no distractions. Like nothing else matters while you're out there and you're racing. Like your job, your whatever stresses you're facing in life, nothing matters. The only thing that you're focused on is this one goal that's in front of you. And yeah, you can achieve that day to day, like in a workout or a task or whatever, but there aren't very many things where you can do it for this length of a period. And it's when you expose yourself to these extended efforts, I think that's where real growth happens, where you really find out who you are, you really find out what you're capable of, because there are going to be problems no matter what. You're going to encounter struggles at some point, and it's just problem solving. How do you overcome them? And when you do that, I think, man, for me, I just learned so much about life in general, like what I can do, and it just makes everything else kind of puts things into perspective for me big time.
Yeah, getting that context, right? Be able to apply it to something else and be like, oh, this is so hard. No, it's not. I've done hard. That's awesome. Evan, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'll just lead with this. I say this a lot, even to my daughters. Like the hard that you choose is going to help you with the hard that you don't choose. And that's the thing. Like nobody told me that I had to sign up for Divide 200 for the second year in a row. I asked myself on the top of that mountain, like, why am I here again? I didn't have a why. I seriously had a pity party for 10 or 15 minutes going like, why am I here? Like, what am I doing? And I started walking and having this like, am I going to drop? Like, what am I going to do? So it's like the things that come up in life that we go through, I feel so much more prepared to deal with because of the choices that I've put myself into to do these hard things and do these races in the way that we do them. And I think, that's just a metaphor for life in my mind of what we have the ability to do to run 200 miles. Well, what's going to happen when you get that thing that pops up in your life and your hot water tank breaks in your house? Like, is that a hard thing or is that like an easy thing now because of what you got to experience outside of it?
That's a great point, actually. My hot water tank just died a couple of years ago, and like it, like flat out exploded and into the basement. And at the time, I thought it was hard, but there are much harder things out there. Sean, you got any additional points on that?
I do. What I heard was when you're out there doing that thing, there's not many distractions, and you get to figure out how important the moment is to you. And so, without all of those distractions, without all of the white noise, with just one foot in front of the other, or with just one pedal stroke in front of the other, whatever the case is that's testing you in the moment, the purity of getting to decide there's no other distractions other than the one that I'm currently engaged in, and how important is it to me. So all of the excuses are kind of stripped away. The excuses of the hot water tank. There's no hot water tank on my bike. There's just me and my bike. Just like Kevin and Evan, there's just their running shoes and mountains. And so the simplicity of the moment is what allows you to dial into the moment. And by dialing into the moment and constantly asking that same, and it is the same question, how bad do I want it? Why am I out here? As Evan said, maybe he didn't know his reason or his why for being out there. But inevitably, if you stay out there long enough, you'll get your why. It's mandatory. Otherwise, you quit. And so you need a why to continue, I feel, in these moments. And the why doesn't have to be like earth-shatteringly important, like you've got to finish this run or the other half of the planet won't survive. It doesn't have to be big deal things. It can be really personal and tiny little reasons. But those whys, they can change from year to year, from moment to moment. So someone can lock in or not their why of the run or of the ride or of the thing. And at some point, things become so hellacious that gets scratched out and a new why shows up. And then the silence of the moment, the purity of the moment gets to pressure test if that why, that new why, is legit or not. There's no one to bug you other than yourself. There's nothing to distract you other than your mind. And so it's a beautiful, hellish vacation to get to know yourself. And so that's why I love these kind of things.
A beautiful vacation in hell. Why don't you guys just come on down? We'll take a little walk around. I love it. Now I have a question on that, because you guys are all kind of talking about, hitting those walls or hitting these points that reconnect you with your why. But can you share a particular moment where you hit that wall and you had to come up with that why in the moment and just go from there? Evan, I'm gonna hit you first on this one. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about that moment. And this was right after, I mean, the last time I saw Kevin, we were at a water drop. And he's like, I'm just going to go on ahead. I'm like, oh, yeah, I'll catch up. And honestly, it was probably about halfway through that section, right after I made the first summit. And I was just kind of creeping up to the next summit. And I just had my pity party. And I had that existential, like, why did I do this again? I don't even know why I signed up. I put money down. I put it on my credit card. I registered for this race. I'm here. And like, I'm a firm believer of any race that I've done in the past, I've always had a very strong why for why I'm there. And not having that to fall back on this time was like really hard for me, because I could usually go back to it and just be like, okay, why are you here? Oh, right. The why that you came in with is what you can lean on in the moment for when you have this feeling. I didn't have that. So I walked and I sat there for a few minutes, and I was like, you know what? Like, you can focus on, the lows and all these other pieces of it, but verbalizing those negative thoughts are just going to bury you even more. And that's why, like, I always like to say, you have to ask questions and not make statements. Statements are like a road to a DNF, in my opinion. Like, you are going to drop out if you keep making statements like, my foot hurts, this sucks, why am I here? You just end up down this spiral. I mean, I've ran away from people during races who have these negative spirals because I don't want it to rub off on me. but I'm having my own in that moment in the dark, trudging uphill with the wind coming at me. I'm just sitting there like, okay, like shake out of it. It doesn't matter. Like, you don't have a why. That's perfectly fine. You don't need to have it. You don't have to have the, like you said, Sean, you don't have to have this big overarching reason of like, I'm going to, cure world hunger by, not, by continuing. Like, it's just not, you don't need that. So for me in that moment, if I could pinpoint why I kept moving forward, it was literally because I hadn't seen my crew yet. And I'm like, you know what? Don't make any decisions until you're with your crew, period. Like, your job right now is to get to your crew. Don't think about the rest of the race. And the one thing that I say to my athletes all the time is, it's very easy to focus on the 100% that's left versus the 60% that you've already done. You can be like, oh, I finished 60%. I only have 40% left. Or you could say, oh man, I have to get another 100 kilometers down this road before I can finish. Well, who cares? Like, I only had 6 kilometers to get to the next aid station. That's what I'm focused on. So that's how I got myself out of it in this go around.
Breaking it down in small chunks. I like this. Kevin, you got any thoughts on time that you hit that wall?
Yeah, I mean, I hit walls like every moment of every race, it seems like. But I mean, I can honestly say, like, I've never really contemplated quitting. I just don't ever see a reason to quit, because unless by continuing, I'm gonna hurt myself, like physically causing permanent damage. I'll walk the rest of the way. I mean, the cutoffs for these longer races are so generous. And I'm not taking away from people that actually, do chase cutoffs and are putting in extreme effort. But often I do. I look at the people that are out there, far longer than I am. And yeah, you might be faster than some people, but honestly, to me, it's more impressive the people that endure longer. I think the speed comes with a little bit of genetics, hard work, but the mental endurance and the ability to continually push yourself, hour after hour, and in this case, like day after day, into like a third, fourth night is remarkable. And then I do think, like, when I'm struggling out there, because it happens. It's gonna happen. I just remember I'm not struggling by myself. There's every other runner or on this race is probably feeling exactly like I am. And I know Evan can attest, like, we had some pretty horrendous weather, which I'm sure added hours to everyone's overall finishing time. And the rain was just nonstop, and it hits like at the worst time overnight, like night 2. And it turned the conditions into like pure mud, which is really difficult to even stand or walk on, let alone try and run. And I said to myself, actually, I had a pacer at that time. I said, you know what the best part about this is everyone's suffering right now. Everyone's experiencing this. It's not just me in that moment experiencing that. So in these races, I think misery loves company. That's such a true statement. And when you realize you're not alone, and you realize other people are out there struggling just as much as you are, for me, it gives me strength. It kind of gives me a little pick me up. And it's like, what do you got? Are you gonna endure and keep going, or are you gonna quit? And if you quit, I mean, the second you quit, I can only imagine is a moment you'll regret that. And I've experienced that in these backyard ultra formats. I've quit those. Well, every backyard I've done, I've never won one, but I've come close. And every time I've quit, it's immediately following that. I'm like, man, I could have kept going. So I just don't want to feel that. It's such a terrible feeling. Because to keep going is where it's at.
Ooh, I really like that. Sean, you got any points on this?
I do. Yeah. Kevin, you're right. To keep going is where it's at, but to quit is also where it's at. Because you need to know both sides of the coin. You've got to learn both of those lessons. And I've got 30, 24-hour solos, and I've quit some of them. And the quitting, the sting of quitting, oh, it's so bad. But that's kind of that's sort of the legitimacy of not quitting. You kind of got to quit to hate the quit, to not quit the next time. And you might quit the next time. And so this is not directed at Kevin or anyone for that matter. It's just directed at me. I have quit them. And I will say this, and there's some that I should have quit that I didn't, that I could tell a story or two about, that it's just insane what I put myself through and didn't quit. And there's some of the races that I haven't quit that I've got like up on my high water mark of that was mental. That was just like radically insane. And I love it. And then there's ones that I've quit and I also have up there at that high water mark of that was freaking bonkers, man. I'm kind of glad I quit, kind of not glad I quit, kind of glad I quit. And then that's the rest of your life. You get to chew on that. You get to chew on the quit and the whys and wheres of good, bad, or indifferent. And you get to learn from them. And so I think that a quitting moment or two is almost mandatory. Now, I'm not referring to everyone out there who's, on their way to the coffee shop and the coffee shop feels like it's a bit of a long walk down the block and you should quit and order the coffee to your office. What I'm talking about is extreme things that you have dedicated a chunk of your life to. Quitting those moments is a lesson. So for the guys on the call right now, to do the race that they did, they had to train, well, I was going to say months and months, but really it's the accumulation of a life's body of work. And so to quit in those moments, it's not like quitting the walk down the block for the coffee. It like leaves a mark. And those marks are important, I feel, in life for years later to reflect on. So quit or no quit, there's lessons in all of it.
And I want to get into those lessons right now, actually, in the fact that, we're talking about these lessons that they teach you something about yourself. But in order to really take those to heart, I mean, you could just run or do a endurance event and then have all these realizations, but then forget them or not think about them or not accept them or not like integrate them into your life. And I'm wondering, what it is that your ability to endure through the events themselves, how do you apply them? How do you use them in your everyday life when you're looking at moving forward with it? Sean, what do you got?
Well, look, I said I quit, but I didn't quit like easily. It wasn't like, oh, I'm kind of bored of competing. I think I'll quit. These are things that were like humongous decisions in the moment. They weren't just like flippant decisions. They were decisions that were hard to make. And that's the importance of making these kind of decisions, that you have to really feel the moment of the suck of quitting and reflecting on that later. It's not just like a happenstance moment of, yeah, whatever, I just quit. That's cool. I'll never think about that quit moment again. These kind of quits are quits that had months or years of preparation leading up to them. And so there's consequence at the very least for the people who've supported you along the way, or at the very least, living rent-free in your mind for years. The last time I quit a race was a world championship 24-hour solo down in California. It was the last 24-hour worlds I ever raced. And the reason I quit was because the course had been changed a couple of days before the event to the kind of course that I think sucks. It was just a big gravel road. And it wasn't, in my opinion, what 24-hour solo mountain bike racing is. It was more of a gravel race. And so not my jam. And 8 hours into it, I was hating on that course so much that I thought, I'm so dogmatic about this, if I just keep on racing, this may be the last time I ever ride a mountain bike. It was destroying my love for riding every lap. I was torn between the obligation of my mind to never quit and the obligation to my future self of, I want to stay in this sport. I love riding a bike. And it was a deal breaker moment for me, believe it or not, in that moment, as I was considering, what am I going to do with this? Am I going to finish out this race and then that's it for me? Or am I going to bail on this race and hopefully be able to ride my bike in the future? I chose to bail, and I'm still riding my bike, so I suppose that's a good thing. But I regret quitting because I'll never know the outcome of if I could have finished that race or not. There's never, ever a perfect answer. There's never an easy answer in these moments if we're talking about things that sting, things that you've committed to, things that you've invested your heart into. So quitting is not easy. Quitting has lessons. And I think that anyone on this panel, if they took the time, they could probably line up all the quits in their lives, and we wouldn't have enough time on the podcast. You've got to quit some things to learn how to stay in some things, in my opinion.
That's a really good point. Evan, I saw you nodding along there. What are you thinking?
Yeah, when Sean said regrets, I've always seen regrets as unrealized potential. You have those quits, you have those quit moments, and you have those regrets afterwards. That, to me, like the fact that you're having a regret from doing something tells me that there's something more to be unlocked that you haven't either been able to access yet. For whatever reason that is, it's the universe basically telling you, like, you haven't learned this lesson yet. And until you learn this lesson, you're probably going to have one or two more like DNFs or bad races or, finishes that you thought you could have done better in, whatever that is, but it's unrealized potential. That's what it is. So that's the big one for me. But the lesson that I've really taken away from not just like my mental health journey with emergency services, as well as ultra running and how those two kind of go hand in hand, is as soon as you tie yourself too closely to what you do as your identity and something happens, whether it be an injury, whether it be, a situation where you can't get to a race because there's a missed flight, or, you have a change in career or your job changes on you. As soon as you tie yourself too closely to that being your identity and that gets taken away, you don't know where you are anymore. You have no clue. So for me, the lessons that I've been trying to learn from ultra running the last couple of years now is to really detach myself from, when I introduce myself, I didn't just introduce myself as, I used to work in emergency services. I am so much more than that now. So I see myself as like these different parts and these different segments along the way. And I really see that, going into everyday life, taking these moments of, running a 200 miler or having run multiple 200 milers now, like if you don't take something away from these, like, I guess, like, yes, there are people chasing podiums and chasing outcomes, but for me, it's so much bigger than that now. It goes beyond the podium. I'm not there, and I think Kevin and I even talked about this during the race. Like, I'm not there racing anybody. Like, I'm there racing myself. Like, what am I trying to achieve through this? I don't care about what the outcome is. If I happen to be the best one on that day because I had the race of my life, amazing. But that wasn't what I set out to do. So for me, it's really just taking those moments. And like you said, it's very easy. You can run these races and you can completely forget about them if you want to. And that's totally fine. If that's your MO, you just want the finish, that's great. But I think there's an opportunity here to take these things into your everyday life and move forward with them.
That's a fantastic insight. Kevin, you got any points on this?
Yeah, just on the quit part before we move on. It's been said, to keep going is hard, and to quit is hard. You get to choose what your heart is going to be, but it's what comes after that choice that can sometimes be, prolonged, like those feelings, those negative feelings, perhaps. Obviously, quitting in that moment, it's going to stop the pain. But I think that long term regret that you'll likely feel for a time, and you'll question a lot, will endure far longer than it would to just keep going, because the race will end. It's got a finite finish at some point, unless you're in the backyard. But even those kind of last person standing races, they do come to an end at some point. So that for me, it's that the short term pain is far less tolerable than that kind of long term regret that I'm going to face if I quit for and there's always good reasons, and Sean touched on some of them, right? The last thing I ever want to do is destroy my love, my passion for this sport. For me, I do it because I just love I love the challenge. I love the journey. Like these long races, I've really kind of gravitated towards lately versus kind of the shorter ones, because it's more, to me, it's more about just those ups and downs, those moments you're problem solving, and then just that, for me, it's a very spiritual journey as well. My faith, I love just that time alone in my head, in my thoughts, in prayer. It's very fulfilling for me. And what that does, how it translates for me into my personal life is yeah, I'm gonna encounter struggles, I'm gonna encounter pain, but I draw myself back to those moments where I'm connecting spiritually, where I'm realizing, remembering what I've accomplished, what I've done, and then drawing on that. You know, David, not to bring David Goggins into this, but I don't agree with everything that guy says, but he has that saying, you put a cookie in the cookie jar. So every time you do something difficult, you're putting a cookie in the cookie jar. And then when those moments come in life, in real life, where there's struggles, you can go back to that cookie jar and pull one of those cookies out and remember what you did. And it's not a very practical thing that I have to think about, but it's just kind of always in the back of my mind that it just kind of reassures what I've done, reassures my mind, reassures my spirit that, hey, you're capable of this. So just keep going, endure. It's going to pass.
I like the idea of filling up the cookie jar consistently, because I think a lot of people just have their hand rested in the cookie jar looking for more reasons, right? Versus actually taking the time to fill them up. Sean, what do you got?
So one of the things that perhaps we need to address real quick is the question itself, and that is, what is your sport revealed? And the sport that we're talking about right now is ultra endurance sports. So there's a wild difference between grabbing a badminton racket and heading out for 30 minutes of badminton, or throwing a football around, or kicking a soccer ball around for an hour or two, versus an ultra endurance event. The reason that there's a big difference between what the fellas did recently and playing a soccer game is that it's the purity of the suffering. It's the purity of no distractions. It's the purity of the ever-present second by second decision of quit, no quit. So you don't get that in a soccer game. You don't get that in a badminton game. You don't get so fatigued that you start going cross-eyed and can't do math. So there's a lot of aspects to ultra endurance events, whether it's running or cycling, or, man, it could be 48-hour solo badminton playing. But there has to be an element of timeline where you start going a little cross-eyed, where you can't do the math, where you're questioning, can you put one foot in front of the other? There has to be enough adversity. As Kevin said, the conditions in the last run, there has to be so much adversity, or enough adversity, that you have questions about why you're there. It's easy to throw on your favorite velour wrist sweatband for quickly wiping your forehead after 20 minutes of badminton. But there's no velour sweatbands out 48 hours into an event. It's filthy, or you've lost it about a day ago in the pitch black when you got hung up on a tree. And so the complexity of these kind of things, I feel elevates the challenge to a degree where, perhaps as Kevin was saying, there's so much on the go that you're pretty much constantly problem solving. Maybe not for the first 12 hours, that's kind of easy. Something breaks, you fix it. Something is out of alignment, you fix it. You're doing something wrong, you fix it. But many, many hours later, simple things start showing up, like just trying to pull on a pair of dry gloves gets difficult, or wondering, which way is north gets difficult. And so it's the complexity of the simple things in life, in ultras, that I find you can't get in other sports. And it's that complexity that creates almost an overwhelming pressure of constant problem solving. The tiny little things that wouldn't have been problems in an event that's 1 or 2 hours long start becoming problems many, many hours into the event. And so if someone's experienced, they can offload all of those tiny problems and take care of it. But inevitably, the problems start rearing their ugly heads, and it turns into a constant troubleshooting process of tiny little things that sometimes you'll have solved 10 minutes ago, forgotten that you solved it 10 minutes ago, and now you're working on it again 10 minutes later in your simplified mind of fatigue, the fog of war, as it were. So there's a wild difference between regular sporting events or regular life events versus a condensed and unrelenting sport like ultra endurance racing.
That's a fantastic angle to take, and I'm just want to go around again on that one. Kevin, you got any thoughts on what Sean just hit up there?
Yeah, I think as you progress along these events, in these multi-day events, the problem solving does become something that you have to get better at, because if you can't solve the small problems and you let these small problems grow into big problems, you're going to have real big problems, and those big problems can turn into a did not finish. So becoming an expert in problem solving and recognizing when something can be a problem or become a problem is super important. Like, for example, just your feet. Your feet take, at least my feet, they take a huge beating on these events. For me, that's probably the number one thing that could wreck my race. For some people, it's their stomach. A lot of people, it's their stomach. I think you probably go into this race, you go into these races with a general overall good fitness. Your body's rested, your muscles are, strengthened. But it's those little things, the intangibles that you don't have a lot of control over, like your stomach. How is it going to feel on the day? How is the weather going to impact your ability to consume calories or drink? And then how is the weather going to impact your feet? And if you don't become an expert at recognizing this very, very small problems, and if you ignore them, you're going to be in big trouble. And that could hold true for just life in general. Like if you let little things kind of build, eventually they become real big problems that are much, much more difficult to solve had you just, focused on them earlier on.
I'm digging this. I'm learning so much, you guys. Awesome. Evan, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think touching back on what Sean was talking about, when these things that we're choosing that are hard, just from human evolution in general, like we place a higher value on things that are harder. Like we believe that is like a more important thing than just the everyday day-to-day life pieces. But if you can somehow like take that high value that you've placed on that and somehow bring that back into your everyday life, even for the mundane things, like if I took care of, like, let's say, like cleaning the kitchen the way I take care of my feet in a 200-mile race, like with that much precision and like thoughtfulness and effort, like I would, like my kitchen wouldn't have a speck of dust inside of it. And I use the kitchen as the example, but it could be anything. If you can take that higher value you've placed on that and somehow like bring that into your like psyche for every day, it's incredible. I mean, you know, I see so many people signing up for these 200-mile races right now, and I mean, this might be an offhand comment, but that probably aren't in a position or shouldn't be registering for these races, having like seeing the history and like how they've ran or how unprepared they are, and you see them toe up to the line, and you ask them what they're eating, and like they tell you what they're eating and all these other things, and you see these things, but then you quickly realize that there's a very big difference between like just being interested in something, because you're only going to do what's convenient if you're interested. So in the race, if something pops up and you're like, oh, my stomach's turning, like, oh, I'm going to go and try some Coca-Cola versus coconut water, or like you're going to do what's convenient, not what you probably should be. But if you're like truly committed to this distance in these races, like you're going to do whatever it takes to get to that finish line. And that's like, again, that's that higher value mentality that if you can take that into your everyday, like those are the pieces that I'm taking out of these races now. Like, I don't like the race is the race. It happened. It's a memory now. That memory is like, that's all it is now. It's finished. That day is done. It's no different than when you get married. Like you get married, that the wedding day is over, but what comes next? Like, what is that next, 30 days after your 200-mile race? What does that look like? Yes, there's recovery, but what did you learn? What did you take away? What can you actually bring back to your everyday life that's going to make a difference? Because that race is, like in our case, 4 days. I will say 4 days, fine. But in most cases, like people are doing these, 1-day races, 10Ks, whatever it is, it's all perspective. But take something away from it, like actually reflect. Like we're so quick to move on to the next thing these days that we don't take that time to reflect on what that experience was for us, or what can we take away, or what can we do better next time. Like reflection is a highly underrated skill coming out of these events that I don't know why more people don't do it.
This is just a theory of mine, but I think it goes back to what you were talking about earlier in distraction, is that most people don't want to do that level of introspection because it's hard work and it takes time to reflect, and you have to actually spend time reflecting. And if you quit, or if you got injured, or you had to step out for some reason, I don't think people want to reflect on that. They just want to move on, and we'll move on to the next thing. And I think that has to do with it. I think that distraction level is what prevents people from taking on those lessons and moving them forward, because you're right, there's so many great lessons in endurance just in general to be able to utilize in your life. And I don't know, I think that's my theory. So Sean, you got any thoughts? You think that's accurate?
So I'll say this, that I think that is the case, that can happen. However, I would suggest that anyone who is serious, I'm not talking about a casual sort of, I like to refer to it as a participant versus a competitor or a racer. You can participate in all kinds of events. You can toe the line clueless, without at all an understanding of what you're about to enter into. And by the way, I'm not opposed to that. I mean, toe the line in a ridiculous event that you're completely unprepared for, and enjoy the lessons. So I'm okay with someone towing the line unaware. I'm also okay with someone showing up as a world champion, towing the line and doing their thing. What I'm not okay with is pretending that the moment didn't happen, that the moment is done. So you've got to think about how to do things better after the fact. You've got to think about the lessons that you learned. You've got to think about who you were in the moment and who you are now. Because one of the important aspects of ultra endurance racing is the person who stepped onto the start line is now different after the race. You are. If it's an ultra and you went all in, you're a different person now. Now, how different, that's up to you. How much reflection you do or not. That's where the devil is in the details, I feel, is how you are able to work through what you've just worked through. So if you're not used to that, if you're not used to drawing the lessons out of your own life in that moment, that's why I always recommend a coach. So these kind of things, these ultra endurance events, again, are no small undertaking. And I think they're best done with a good coach who can guide you through the process. Maybe less about turning you into a better competitor, but more about opening all of the doors along the way for you to learn as many lessons as possible until you actually get to the start line. And then once you're on the start line and you finish the race, after the fact, all the lessons that you can be exposed to by a good coach. You can do it all by yourself, of course, but a coach will help facilitate a more expeditious learning of some of these lessons that can set you up for the next race and, in effect, not quite double your learning ability, but certainly speeding up your ability within the sport that you're engaging in, but more importantly, life that is wrapped around it.
This is getting really, really fascinating. Kevin, you got any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I think I like personally, I've never had a coach. I've never, but I am definitely a student of this sport, and I think although I think a coach can be very beneficial for some people, if you choose not to go that route, I think there's a lot of options available for you. There's so much information out there now, podcasts and just studying what other people have done, and then at the end of the day, like nothing is going to overcome experience. I think just if you do it long enough, and like we've talked about, failure is a phenomenal teacher, but so is experience. Eventually, you'll do something long enough, and I've learned so many lessons. And every time I finish one of these races, I look forward to the next one because I know I can improve based on mistakes I made or things I've learned throughout that process, throughout that journey. So I always look forward to that. And then as far as like what you extract or extrapolate from the journey, I agree with what Evan said. Yeah, it's super important to kind of reflect back on it. And I do, maybe subconsciously, I don't dwell on it. I'm kind of, I move on. Okay, that race is complete. I kind of revel in the accomplishment for a little while. It's such a great feeling when you cross that finish line. But for me, it's never about the finish line. It's more about the process, the journey of getting there. That really, that's where all the growth happens, and then that's what you get to reflect on. Because that finish line is such a brief moment compared to what you endure before you even get there.
Yeah, when I finished the Nijmegen earlier this year, that final evening and going to sleep, and I was like, yes, I did it, haha! And then I racked out, and I woke up in the morning, and I'm like, my body hurts, dang! Like now I have to deal with this, and the actual walk, it kind of dissipated. I had to actively go back and think about it afterwards. This is awesome. Evan, you got any additional thoughts before I jump on the next question?
Yeah, just really quick. I'll just add. So, I mean, I think we always are so focused again on that outcome and what are we going to get out of this experience. But like, that's not going to build your character for like your everyday moving forward. We need to be thinking about more like, what are we willing to put into this? So that's going to be what's going to build your character. Like, what are you actually willing to do to accomplish that goal? I mean, in our case, like, what are you willing to do to finish a 200-mile event, regardless of where you place? Like, what are you willing to do? And I think so many people are probably really like too afraid to put themselves in those positions, whether that be in life or 200-mile or a race or any situation, because our bodies try to keep us safe. Like, fear is a driver. I mean, it goes back like centuries. Like, that is what fear is. Like, fear is our bodies trying to keep us safe from doing something that we probably shouldn't be putting ourselves into based on what our body is telling us. But I'll leave it at that, because I think that's kind of where I see it as, what are you willing to put in versus focusing on what you're going to get out of it.
Now, this makes me curious because the question I had that I want to get into right now, it kind of ties back to something Kevin was saying earlier about balance. And I think this is a key question for a lot of people is, understanding the balance between the pushing oneself, which is necessary, right? For some people, it's pushing themselves just to toe the line. And for other people, it's pushing themselves to move up the leaderboard. Some people, it's winning the event. So, like some people, it's just completing. But there's a balance between pushing that and understanding your own limits, right? There's a line there, and being able to balance that throughout a long endurance race. I'm wondering what your guys's thoughts are on that, just in general. I'm going to start with Sean on this one. What do you think?
Is it because you saw my cheeky little smirk?
It is, yes.
Yeah. So I'll say this, that like Kevin, I've never had a coach. And so when I say it's good to get a coach, it is. And as a coach for 15 years, I know that it's good to have a coach because I've coached enough that I've seen the results, and enough people have said thanks that I know that it's a good idea. But it's not a good idea for everyone. And it's not a good idea for Sean. And so I've been self-coached my entire life for pretty much everything that I've ever done. And that's because I'm a certain kind of individual, and I'm not unique. There's lots of individuals like me, but I prefer to learn the hard lessons the hard way by myself with the maximum sting. All the sweat, blood, and tears that I invest in something, it's usually my fault. It's not my coach's fault. So when I trip down in the dark and bang my silly head, it's Sean's fault, not my coach's fault. And that's how I learn best. And so I've engaged in enough things throughout my life that I know how to push hard. And so to that point, a tiny little story. I was down at a 24 Hours of Old Pueblo down in Tucson, Arizona, racing in the desert. And I was self-supported down there by myself, no pit crew. And my pit actually was a cactus that I was just dangling some of my articles of clothing off of the cactus, and a pile of empty water bottles underneath it. I was just turning laps like a lunatic, and I didn't even know how I was doing in the race because no one was telling me. And so as I came into the finisher's tent, I was one of the last to go through the finisher's tent with about 10 seconds left until the 24-hour mark hit the mark. And as I was coming through, all of the people who were marking and recording the times, they were all cheering me. Yeah, that's awesome. Go, go, go. You've got another lap. Go, go, go. And I was so like not a brilliant mathematician at that point. I looked at everyone and I was like, yeah. And I just sprinted across the let's go for another lap, beep, beep line. And so now I'm out on the course with no water and no calories. And I've got like another full hour lap in front of me in the bonkers desert heat with an insane headwind. And I was already on my last legs at that moment. And I didn't have much more to give. So as I've mentioned this story before, so I'll keep it really brief. At one point, I was out on the course looking for empty gel wrappers that I could stop, pick up, and try to suck a little bit of goo out of them. And I went through a number of wrappers, man, out there in the desert, sucking on all kinds of tin-foiled wrappers that I didn't know whether it was a guy or a girl that had thrown it off to the side. That was messing with my head as well, by the way. Random people's gel wrappers. So I managed to finish the lap, and it's moments like that that I love about endurance racing, because no coach can talk me through it. There's only Sean who can make his way through that based on all the mistakes that Sean's made in the past. And while I was out there on that mistaken lap, here's what I got to tell myself. Whatever, man. I've done harder things. I'm not going to die out here. And if I'm like in that much of a hurt locker, they'll come and find me and revive me. That's what I said. Kept it super simple. And sometimes that's what you've got to rely on when you're pushing yourself harder than you think you can. Reflecting back on stuff that you've done that is an order of magnitude harder, perhaps. And so these moments where we've maybe pushed too hard, that's the gold, because you get to put that in your back pocket for that next race, for that next moment, for that next mistake, which, by the way, again, that last lap was a total mistake on my behalf. I would never let any of my athletes do what I did, but I'm a freaking lunatic. And that's the way it is. And I managed to finish that lap kind of like barely, but I know how to push myself to the limit. And I wouldn't ask anyone else to push themselves to that same limit. But we all have to learn our own personal limits in these moments. And that's why I love pushing hard to understand what I'm capable of.
It's funny. I got a picture of you putting, when you put cookies back into the cookie jar, right? You're trying to fill up that cookie jar, and Sean's the guy that bakes like the giant cookie that's like this big, and he's trying to put it in the cookie jar. It just doesn't fit. I love it. Evan, you got any thoughts on what Sean just dropped?
Yeah, that I mean, Kevin touched on it before as well too, about that experience and being able to lean on that. And I like to think of it like a, call it a tickle trunk toolbox, whatever you want to call it. But having that body of evidence that you can go back to, and when you're in that low, or in my case, like when I had that pity party on the mountain, and you can actually like look back, and because I did this race last year, I completely forgot about it until you just prompted me there with this question. I actually remembered I told myself, like, you're 4 hours ahead of where you were last year. It was dark when you were here last year. And that was enough for me to just be like, okay, what's the next thing? Oh, get to my crew. So it's having that body of evidence that you can look back on and know. And then the other side of it too, I think this is when we talk about ultra running, and I would argue that, anything 50 mile and below, there are some people that could literally pull up and run a 50 miler on a weekend, having very low mileage during the week, and do really well. But as soon as you go above these distances, like, ultra running turns into a lifestyle. It is consuming. It is, like, we talk about that balance piece of just, even, I don't like the word balance when it comes to like work-life balance, that type of thing. But really, like, I have 2 young daughters. I have a family. I have a career. I have X number of things that can get in the way of my training. So my training has to be very calculated and like consistent and progressive and focused. So in my case, like, I've had 4 coaches during my ultra running since 2017, and I've learned something different from every single one of them that I've now taken into my coaching. And now the coach that I'm with now has done things that I can only aspire to even like begin to think about doing. And then now I'm talking about, we were talking just before we got on this call about Ned Brockman, who just ran 1,000 miles around a track. And I'm here talking to my friends on the weekend saying like, oh, could I do that? Like, I never would have thought about that, 7, 8 years ago when I'm running my first, 50K. And I think putting yourself in these positions, when I talk about making training be like of super importance to me, because I only have limited time. So I run fairly low mileage compared to a lot of like ultra runners who are doing these distances. And I figured out I can maintain it. But I'm purposely putting myself into those hard training blocks of, perfect example. I woke up one morning and I was like, hey, I wonder if I could do this entire mountain day fasted. Just purely out of choice, because I want to know if I get into a race and I'm having issues with my stomach, can I go 5 hours without eating food? Could I do that? So then I'm not questioning myself in the middle of a race. Can I do it? I do it during my training. And I found out I can go 6 to 7 hours in the mountains and 40K on fasting. And I don't want to, condone it for everybody to do this like every single time you go out. But I now know in my body of evidence that I can do 40K with no calories and still be moving. So that to me is the most important thing, is do the hard things in your training. That, like, and no different than in life, like, do the hard things before the hard thing shows up. Like, put yourself in those positions before that hard thing shows itself, so you can move through it and move past it without overthinking it, or having these negative thoughts or all these problems popping up. So that's the way that I look at it.
I love that. But 40K on an empty stomach, oh man, that's gotta suck. Kev, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, to go back to your question on your recognizing what your limits are. I think it's important to and again, I'll just go back to experience. Like, we're all going to know our bodies individually, how we respond to pain and discomfort, and then it's just recognizing the difference between pain and injury. Like pain is, I think pain is your body's way of telling you, hey, something you're doing is probably could injure you, but not all pain leads to injury. And it's just recognizing, I've started a lot of runs with like these little niggles in my hamstring or I've been dealing with plantar fasciitis now. And I just saw recently on an Instagram post, a pretty well-known ultra endurance athlete was talking about this kind of phenomenon that he's gone into these races with these kind of injuries, air quotes, but they weren't actually injuries, and those things kind of went away after 8 or 9 hours of running. And I don't know, and I've experienced that myself. I don't know what the mechanism is. I don't know why. And I've kind of stressed about him going into a race, and you know what? I'm just going to go. I'm just going to start the race, toe the line, put one foot in front of the other, and eventually, that pain goes away. And what all that to say is, I think our bodies the human body is so adaptable. I think what are the power of your mind over your actual body is where I think you're going to see tremendous application of what is capable. So, for example, like if you tell yourself, like when I'm running and I tell myself, okay, I got to go from A to B, and A to B might be 400 kilometers. As soon as I get in one distance, for example, if another example, if I'm going A to B and A to B is only like a 25-kilometer run, as soon as I get to the B point, my brain has already told my body, okay, it's over. And that's when I start to feel all the pain and all the discomfort and all the stiffness. But on these like long endurance events, I get, I'll run 25 kilometers, like that might be the distance between aid stations support. When I get to that point, like my mind has already told my body, I got to keep going. So it just tells you how adaptable your body is, and what your brain, the inputs that your brain is giving your body is so tremendously important. So it's just recognizing that, like, I think we can all, maybe even Sean has experiences like the second you cross that finish line is like everything shuts down, your body's a wreck. But halfway through a race, you might be feeling those niggles, those pains. You got to keep going. So as long as your brain recognizes that I got to keep going, I think the body will follow.
That's a super interesting point, Sean. You got thoughts on that?
I do. Something that Kevin said that I've never really thought about before, and I'm not sure this really works very well for everyone. I'll just throw it out there as a casual statement, and then I'm going to bypass it for others to think about. So pain can be an indication of a potential injury. I'll loosely paraphrase. I'm not saying that it is an indication of injury, but pain can show injury, or pain can show clarity. And so I'm just going to leave it at that. And I'm going to move on to the next thing that I've got to say, and that is based on what Kevin was talking about, the idea that you can run for quite a ways once your body loosens up or warms up to the idea that it's about to go hard for a bunch of hours. Once it loosens up, you can get focused up and you can start shunting away the pain. And that is the clarity of the mission, or the clarity of why you're there. And I think that this is something that can easily be seen, and Kevin, you would know about this. When police recruits are going through OC spray training, or oleo resin capsicum, or pepper spray training, when they're sprayed, if they don't stay on task to make an arrest, or hit the heavy bag, or do a simulated draw on a person, or do an arrest, or whatever the case is in training, if you don't stay focused when you've been pepper sprayed, then the wheels just come right off the bus within seconds. But if you stay focused as a Leo, or as a police recruit, if you stay focused from the moment the spray hits your eyes until all of your tasks are completed, you'll stay in the game. You'll do everything that you need to do. And then the moment that someone looks at you and says, okay, now you're done. Now you can relax, or now you can wash your eyes. That's again when the wheels come off the bus. At least that's what I experienced when I got sprayed super duper hard. I did all the things that I needed to do. Then the moment that all of my tasks were done, I wanted to like curl up in the fetal position and suck my thumb because I had no more tasks in front of me. And I was in the hurt locker in my mind. But if I had another task to do in front of me, I would have stayed task oriented. And I would have put up with all of the nonsense, the McDonald's French fry fryer that was going on in my 2 Mark 1 eyeballs. I could have ignored all of that if I had more tasks in front of me. But the moment the tasks are done, that's when the French fryer effect takes effect. So in these kind of races, if you're not reminding yourself of why you're in the race, why you're in the event, it's pretty easy to like almost have the French fryer eye effect come into play where that sting, that little niggle that's starting to show up, I'm out of here. Niggles are always going to show up in races. In fact, it'll be niggles with a capital N. It'll be really uncomfortable at some point in that race. But you get to work through that stuff or not. But all of these niggles, you can bypass all of them. You can create a really strong construct in your mind and ignore all of the niggles and make it to the finish line and beyond. Now, here's the interesting part to me. As Kevin stated, after 24 hours of racing, the moment that you're done, the worst part of the race, always, for any participant or any racers that I've ever been with, is the moment that you have to tear the pit down. Like the race is done. You've just put out 1 bajillion calories to finish that race. And the moment that now you've got to like take off your shoes and now you've got to put them in a little, now it's going here. And now you've got to grab a towel and now you've got to wipe down your bike. And now you're tearing down a mechanic tent. All of this stuff feels like it feels like a D-Day campaign. It feels like there's a lot to do and there's no juice to do it. Meanwhile, you've just taken over Europe, as it were. But now, once Europe's taken, you can't actually stand on the beach and wave across the English Channel. You've got nothing left in the tank, is what you tell yourself. And so the mind drives all of this stuff. It's the mindset. As I've said many a time, ultra endurance racing is 90% mental and the other 10% is mental. And the mental game will last as long as you want it to last. So you can finish your race, you can tear down that pit, you can get in the car, you can drive home, you can get home, and you can be a superhero. Or you can finish your race and think, man, I'm finished. And then the wheels come off the bus. Hard. Like you're the village idiot hard. And so it all depends on where your mind is at in the moment.
I'm really digging this. This is hilarious. And I'm thinking that each one of these events obviously gives us kind of a relationship with pain. Anybody that's done anything for long periods of time has built a relationship with their own pain. And I'm wondering what sort of, I guess, mental training do you guys utilize when dealing with the relationship of your own pain? Because it does take a little bit of training, I think, at least in my mind. What do you think, Evan? Any thoughts?
Oh, this is a big one for me. I'll say that quote that Sean said, that's actually my ultra running coach's quote, Ray Zahab. He's a Canadian ultra runner, and I actually had that on my Strava when my wife and I met, and he knew him, and that's how I got connected. Big story there, but it's funny that you said it. It just kind of popped into my mind too. I had a mantra for this race, and I'm not a big mantra guy, but man, did it work. It like super simple. It's going to sound so cliche, but what the mind believes, the body will achieve. I said that to myself I countless times during this race, every single time I felt any of those situations, it was like, don't give pain a voice, because as soon as you give pain a voice, it's going to talk back. And as soon as it starts talking back, that's when you're going to have that, like, the roommate in your head that's not paying rent, the little liar, whatever you want to call it, that voice inside your head that's going to be like, but you don't want to be in pain. You can just quit at the next aid station. You have a hotel room you can go back to. Like, it's just all these little things come down the line. So I just wanted to say that. Now, for the mental training, so just to give a brief backstory, I was a air ambulance EMS fire dispatcher for better part of 20 years now. Can no longer go back to my role due to PTSD, depression, anxiety. I had countless hours of therapy from every modality you can possibly think of. And the only thing that really helped me is accelerated resolution therapy, which is essentially similar to EMDR therapy, where you follow a hand back and forth and it's rapid eye movement. And what you're trying to do is reconnect neural pathways in your brain. I did not realize until probably about 7 months into doing it why I loved it so much, and because it mimicked how my eyes moved on the trails when I was running, because you're constantly moving left and right the entire time. So I actually utilize it as a form of therapy or meditation, just to process things that I'm thinking or feeling about my body or the race or what's going on. So I actually use like pieces of what I learned in therapy to help me on the trails, and what helped me in therapy also helps me like process things on the trail, or vice versa. Like what I do in ultra running helped me process things in therapy. So for me, that mental aspect of being able to get so deep inside of your head and feel so deeply that I would argue that a lot of people don't know how to feel anymore. Like how many people can honestly sit and like recognize, like, I feel tightness in my stomach because I'm thinking about X, Y, or Z. So for me, that mental aspect of the therapy being brought into my running, it just unlocked an entirely different avenue for me to process things when I am feeling the pain, when I am experiencing those niggles, when I am experiencing those deep negative thoughts about wanting to, maybe not quit or maybe have a sleep when I shouldn't. And really, the other thing that I used as a mantra during the race, which again can be used every day in life, is the choice that I'm making right now going towards like what I actually want to achieve. So if I say, if I sleep for 3 hours, is that going to benefit me to what I want to achieve, or should I only sleep for an hour and then get back out there? So that's another one that I like to use as well from the mental training aspect.
These are so great. Mantras are we did an entire show on mantras actually at one point. It's awesome. Kevin, you got any points on this?
Yeah, with like mental training, for me, I mean, it goes back to something Evan said earlier, like what you expose yourself to in the lead up to the race or a big effort is what you're gonna get out. So I try to be I don't purposely want to be uncomfortable, because we all as humans we seek comfort, and to seek discomfort is very counterintuitive. I know I'm going to be uncomfortable during a race, but do I have to do that kind of in my everyday training? Yeah, I think it's important. I think, when you choose to wake up, like I would much rather sleep until, 7 or 8 in the morning, as opposed to getting up at, 5 or 4:30 to go for a morning run. I would rather do a kind of a novel route that is kind of different, something in the mountains versus, running up and down the same hill continuously for 8 hours at a time. But I know that exposing myself to those difficult things kind of in the everyday training is really going to benefit me in the long run, because that's going to build that mental resilience that I'm going to need when the day comes. So yeah, I think just what you do, how you train is really important. Of course, your training is always going to be calculated depending on what your goals are. But how you train and what you expose yourself to in that training is really important too. So be uncomfortable. Go do, wait for it to get cold and wet and rainy, or, pick the same route. Do the same, 200-meter elevation route over and over and over again until you're completely sick of it, or you can recognize every single rock on that trail and remember to close your eyes and open them and know exactly where you are. If someone to pick you up and plop you somewhere. For me, that's what I do. I don't particularly enjoy it, but I do recognize the benefits of it.
I love that that's going to be a quote. I'm probably going to put it into one of the clips. Is I don't particularly enjoy it, but I'm going to do it anyway. Sean, you got any thoughts on this?
And I think that's really important. I think that is kind of what it's all about. It's the secret sauce to life, as it were. The things that we don't want to do, we go do them because they're hard to do. So, Evan, you'd said that you'd done a number of hours without any calories. I've done that a pile of times up here in our mountains, out on my bike, just riding 5 or 6 or 7 hours on just water to see if I can do it. I know I can do it because I've done it in the past, but it's not a one and done for me on everything. The phases of life, what I could do when I was 20, what I can do when I'm 60. I gotta test myself to see what I'm capable of now versus several decades ago. I don't live on the dream of that 30-year-old Sean being a semi-superhero abilities in my physical prowess. I'm not that anymore, but I'm always testing maximum Sean at whatever phase of life I'm in. And that requires doing freaking hard things. And I'm not talking about casual hard things, because casual hard things are when I was young. Over my life, I've been taught how to do really hard things. And so those really hard things to me are normal now. So it's my job constantly to make the abnormal normal. And it was actually an old saying of ours back in the day, normalize the abnormal. And so the more often I can do that throughout my life, the more often I get to expose myself to more and more radical things, more and more extreme things, more and more, for me, notable things. And so all of if we're all being honest, if we all think back over the last couple of decades, there's barely a thing you'll remember except all the frickin' hard things. Now, you'll remember getting married, of course. You'll remember births. You'll remember, you get your first dog, whatever the case is. All of those things are notable. But the things that are equally as notable as maybe getting married is that bonkers day when things went totally sideways. You lost a running shoe or whatever, and you had to run out of the mountains hopping on one leg because you couldn't find your running shoe. It's those moments that stick around in our minds. So as far as I'm concerned, life will slip by unaware, unnoticed, and unremarkable unless you commit to doing something that is bonkers from time to time.
I got to make a shirt now with that. Do something bonkers from time to time. I think that'd be great. Now, I have a question on this. Now, while I was doing a little bit of research for ultra endurance, is the flow state. And it's been referred to many times through ultra runners. And I think, Sean, you and I, we've talked about it a number of times as well. I don't think we've ever done a show specifically on it. That might be interesting. But I'm wondering, what do you guys know about it? Have you experienced it? Have you hit it? What's it like for you? And I'm going to start with Kevin on this one. What do you think?
The flow state. I guess it depends how you define the flow state. I mean, if you're talking about getting into kind of a groove where, you're just clipping along, and I think the longer the race, there's definitely moments where, I don't remember from A to B. I don't remember how I got there. I remember very little about, even as I reflect back on the race that Evan and I just finished in September, I'd have to really think about, really, mind my memory pretty hard to kind of try to remember some of the different parts of the trail, of the course, because I think when you're so focused on just moving forward, it does become like a flow state. And then there's the whole, your mind is so, for me, it gets so distracted with other things that you're thinking about. People always ask me like, what do you think about for, 50 or 60 or 70 hours? And I honestly I can't really answer that question because I think about a lot. Usually I'm just thinking about, what's next, what's ahead, the next aid station, trying to get there. And then you throw in hallucinations, you throw in, extreme fatigue, you throw in like pain, you throw in like blisters. Those are all kind of distractions that kind of, your mind gravitates to. I think, I often say like your mind can really only focus on one thing at a time. For me, anyways, especially if I have multiple parts on my body that are hurting, I'm only going to recognize one injury or one piece of pain. Like if my foot's hurting and my hip's hurting, I'm probably only going to think about, my foot, and that it might go back to my hip, but it might go back to my foot, but I'm never really recognizing both at the same time. So that flow state for me is just, it's really, it just happens. You move along the route. Eventually I think time just becomes really abstract. It becomes an anomaly. Time is so, different for me. It passes differently when you're in a race because you're so distracted. You're thinking about different things, but you're also focused on that task of getting to the finish line. But that's really back and deep in your thought process. So you're not thinking about that per se. You're thinking more about those short-term goals. So yeah, flow state's one of those interesting things that I'm not sure I understand fully, but I definitely, my mind is kind of all over the place at times, and eventually, time just passes really differently at time for me during a race.
Yeah, it's like losing yourself in the moment, right? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm here. Cool. Evan, you got thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I almost did a flow state certification, a year and a half ago, when I was going through all my stuff. And surprisingly enough, I actually have a tattoo on my arm, which is runner's high. It's the chemical formula for runner's high, which is what people, I guess, equate with flow state. So I'm definitely labeled with it. And the answer is yes. Like, I think I've hit it multiple times. It's when you can get so far out of your head and into your body that the two, you can't differentiate between the two. And it's just like this, like, the way that I describe it is like this, it's this fluid motion where you're just like, this forward momentum is carrying you. Everything is slowed down. Nothing else around you matters. Sean said it right from the beginning. Like, you have one task. You're focused on this one thing. There's nothing else going on around you. And you are just like in the moment. You are so beyond present that it's almost like this like out of body experience where I'm going to get really philosophical here, where you're literally like, you feel like you're above yourself, watching yourself running on the trail. That to me is like such a crazy sweet spot. And it's not even a hallucination. It's like where you can get so far outside of yourself, where you literally see yourself as like this meat sack running on the trail, and your consciousness is like above it, watching you do this thing. And it's happened to me multiple times on these races. And I don't know what the answer is for unlocking it, or why it happens, or how somebody can get there. I mean, I've done a lot of stuff with performance breath work and things as well too, through the Oxygen Advantage program, and I'm getting my certification for that right now. And there's so many ways to like open yourself up to, I guess, to be able to get to that place of maybe accessing it. But I think it's all about presence and being in the moment, and just like being where your feet are, or where your wheels are on your bike, Sean, for you. But it's about being there and recognizing that it's like we get so few moments in life now where you can not have these distractions. And it really, like, distraction isn't even part of flow state at all. It's like you're distraction free because you're so there, that you literally think about nothing. You don't think about the credit card bill that you have due on the 25th. You are there doing the thing, and that is the only thing that matters in that moment.
I like that line. Just there doing the thing. John, thoughts on flow state?
Many, and it's such a big subject. It would be hard to kind of articulate the full sense of it for me anyway. I'll say this very simply. I do believe it's a state where you disappear, where you're not looking at your feet, watching them hit the dirt. You're not, as Evan said, thinking about your credit card bill on the 25th. You're simply existing, but not existing existentless. You're existing with a purpose, but that purpose is for you to figure out. And the purpose isn't like a big flashing sign in front of you that says, flow state, bro, stay in the flow state. I don't get any of that. I don't get any feedback from the universe, as it were, other than I disappear into it, whatever that means to anyone who's listening right now. And as I disappear into the moment, I do the thing that I'm there to do, whatever that is, whether that was a door kick or whether that was riding a bike. Whatever the case, if I'm making a coffee sometimes in the morning, I'll disappear into the coffee. I won't it's not that I don't exist as Sean. I just won't exist with all of the angst of the credit card bill showing up on the 25th. And so the ability to strip out all of the white noise of life, the static, the nonsense that is unimportant in that moment, therein lies the trick for flow state. Can you pursue it, or does it occur? These are important questions that we aren't going to solve in this podcast, but what hopefully this question will do is have someone think about, well, what is flow state to me? And how would I achieve it? And no one in this podcast today, I believe, is going to lay out the 12 steps to how to achieve flow state. But hopefully this will encourage someone to go look up what flow state might mean to them, do a little bit of research and see what that's about. Now, I want to touch on something that is related to this in a small way, but hopefully it'll encourage a new branch of conversation here in a sec. When I was doing a 48-hour solo mountain bike race, it was actually the world's first down in Texas. I was out there on in the middle of the night, and I came around a corner, and the weather was brutal for Texas at the time. I was one of the few out there on the course. And as I rounded this corner, I looked off to my left flank, and I saw a massive, glowing toadstool, like a big mushroom, but it was big and glowing. And as I looked at it, I thought, what the heck is and then it was gone. I was past it. I rounded the corner, it was gone. I didn't look over my shoulder to see if the glowing toadstool was still there. And again, this was a big, magical, glowing toadstool in the forest. And I went around, did my lap. And as I was coming back on the lap again, whatever, 300 hours, I'm anticipating seeing the glowing toadstool or not. I was all up in my head thinking, was that for real? Or was that imagined? What is even going on right now? And as I got up to the spot on the corner where that glowing toadstool should have been, it wasn't there. But it was there the lap before. And I would have put $1 bajillion on the table to say that glowing toadstool was there when I saw it. So where did it go? Where did it go on that next lap? Was it there on the lap before or not? That question, it's not that it's driven me crazy for the rest of my life, but that question is a moment that I'll never forget. And it's these moments, not that I'm trying to solve the mystery of the universe about glowing toadstools. These moments are the moments that you're supposed to reflect on and learn something about yourself, learn something about the moment, learn something about the world around you. Have the curiosity to think, is there such a thing as glowing toadstools? Or is that just Alice in Wonderland stuff? The more you put yourself out on these events, the more extreme you can engage in life, the more you can put yourself out there in the hurt locker, the more often these moments will show up. And you can call them flow state moments, you can call them magical toadstool moments. None of these will occur if you never engage in life to the degree where you're possibly exposed to the extremeness of life.
Ooh, let's get into this. Is it real? Did I just see that hallucinations that are on the course? Kevin, you talked about hallucinations. You kind of mentioned earlier. What are your thoughts on this?
Oh man, yeah, I could tell you all sorts of stories about hallucinations that I've encountered. I mean, for me, hallucinations are directly correlated to fatigue and sleepiness. And man, I really actually enjoy that part of the race. When I get there, I know that maybe that is flow state for me, but I always look forward to it. I'm always wondering, when am I going to start to see things? And it's not like things appear out of nowhere, but they have appeared out of nowhere. It's more common for me, for my mind to kind of um, try to make sense of my surroundings. So at the divide, I saw there was quite a few grouse like out on the trail. So I would start seeing grouse everywhere, and then I started wondering, like, are these real, or am I imagining them? To the point where I was with a pacer, and I saw a couple of grouse on the trail. He was running in front of me. And I saw these grouse on the side of the trail, and I thought to myself, like, long and hard before I even opened my mouth, I'm like, Kevin, make sure what you're seeing is real before you open your mouth and point them out. And I was staring at these grouse on the side of the trail to the right of me as we're approaching them, and my pace is in front of me. And I thought, okay, I'm 100% certain these are real. They're moving. They look exactly like the grouse I've seen. And then I opened my mouth and I said, "Hey, you see those grouse underneath that log there?" And my pacer's like, "What? Where?" I'm like, "They're right there, right in front of you on the right." And of course they weren't there. But it's just one of these things that your mind starts to play all these crazy tricks on you. And I'm sure Evan's experienced hallucinations before. It's always fun to reflect on what you've seen and what's real and what's not. But it's just, I guess it's part of the journey. It's part of the experience of pushing yourself. Like, you would never, unless you do drugs, you're not gonna hallucinate like that in real life. Not naturally, anyways. So it's the closest thing I think I'll ever get to, a trip from, doing mushrooms or LSD or something, which I've never done, but I can only imagine that's what it would be like, because you're 100% certain that what you're looking at is real. And I can go on and on about different things I've seen and how convinced I was in my mind that they were real, until you get up to that point where you get real close and you realize, oh, it's just a rock, it's just a stump, it's just a twig or something. So it's pretty fascinating. It's enjoyable. It helps kind of put what you're doing into perspective, because it's not normal. You only kind of get to that point in the extremes, and that really extreme, fatigue or sleepiness.
I can just imagine the Mad Hatter popping out of one of those glowing toadstools that I was talking about, and that would make a very interesting run for sure. Evan, you got any interesting stories?
Well, you would think that the amount of money and kilometers that I've raced and the hours that I've been on the trails, that I would have paid for my hallucinations by now, but I have never hallucinated on any of my long distance ultras ever. So I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I don't know if I'm sleeping too much. I mean, I think I sleep pretty little, like 3 hours in like 80 hours. Like, I feel like I should be in that window, but I'm not. So I've yet to experience it. I mean, I've heard all these stories. The only thing I will say is I'll maybe talk about experiencing somebody going through a hallucination is actually, I think, scarier than somebody like me just having my own hallucination. So I had to defer Tahoe 200 this year due to an injury, and I ended up going to sweep night 3 and night 4 of the 200 miler. Now, if you ever want to see people in very sleep deprived states, go and sweep a 200 miler on night 3 or 4, because you're just hiking the whole time. So, like, you guys talk about rucking, you want to go experience hallucinations, go sweep night 4 of a 200 miler. I came across a vest that was a running vest that was on the ground with my other sweeper that I was with, just gear everywhere, no person in sight. We saw the name on the bib and we're like calling out this person's name, can't find him anywhere. I turn my headlight on to the brightest setting and I just start looking around, and I catch this thing off in the distance, like 20 feet away near like an outhouse at a campground. And I walk a little bit closer, and all I see is somebody on the ground with a stick on their knees, stabbing the ground, yelling like we're talking like tongues. Like I did not understand a word this person was saying. Just screaming at the ground, stabbing it with a wood stake. So I get a little bit closer, still trying to keep my distance because I know this person is completely out of it. I'm about probably 6 to 8 feet away from him. I start yelling his name, doesn't respond, got a little bit closer, yell his name again. He pops up, and you can just tell based on his face, like he's just like full dead-eyeing me, holding this stick up in the air, facing me 6 feet away. And the only thing I can think to myself is if he comes at me, I have to put him on the ground because he does not know what he's doing right now. And so like experiencing somebody going through something like that, and then finally he just like shook out of it. And I was like, "Are you okay?" He's like, "Oh, I'm just so tired. I haven't eaten in like 10 hours. I haven't slept at all." And we're talking like we were on like hour 89 of a 200 miler, and he still hadn't slept, and he hadn't eaten in like 10 hours. So, I mean, that's my story. So witnessing somebody going through it is, I think it would probably be it's actually scarier than going through it myself, because at least I wouldn't remember it. And I went and told him after the race what he did, and he's like, "Oh man," he's like, "Thank you for helping me." So that's my story with it. But I need to get a hallucination. I don't know what I'm doing wrong.
I couldn't tell you, but I can tell you, I'm just happy that he had clothes on. It could have been a lot. It could have been worse. John, you got any interesting times other than your mushroom?
Yeah, I was actually thinking the same thing. I was expecting that story to maybe take a turn where he was just laying there naked, full crazy. But yeah, you know, there's maybe for the next run, you can cross your fingers, bump into that. I've got a question for you guys because I feel like I want to better understand what you went through in the running race. I know ultra endurance from my perspective, but can you guys maybe talk us through the event itself that you just came out of in September? How long it lasted, how you approached it, how much sleep you had, just general terms for anyone who's listening so they can understand the extent of what you went through?
Good question, Kevin. I'm going to hit you first. What do you got?
Yeah, so the Divide 200 is 200 mile, so it's like 320-ish kilometer race. What makes this race, I mean, the distance is one thing, but the amount of elevation you're climbing. So my watch calculated about 12,000 meters. I saw some people reach like 13,000 meters. So we're talking what that is. I guess what that would be in feet, maybe 40,000 feet ish. So it all depends on what your watch registered that day, but it's a pretty rugged, remote route in the southwest part of Alberta, in the Crow's Nest area, the Southern Rockies. The race starts and finishes at Castle Mountain Ski Resort, so it's pretty remote, like no cell service around there, very little cell service throughout the course, and you're out in the middle of nowhere. You get a nice GPS tracker, so your crew and your friends can follow you along in the race. More importantly, they can know where you are, which is important. If you get lost, and the route is flagged and marked along the whole way, and you're just the race starts, and the first 60-ish kilometers, you're climbing a majority of that 12,000 meters in that first third of the race. So the start of the race is quite challenging. It's a lot of hiking, because really you're not going to be anymore. Even if you could run up these mountains, you'd be very inefficient and you'd be burning a ton of energy. So you're just power hiking all the ups, kind of running the flats and the downhills, and just trying to make as much good time as you can, because things are going to get rotten, and they get pretty rotten later on in the race, where you wanted to move faster, but you just couldn't, just because of the conditions of the trails were just so horrendous. And the weather impacts the race as well. We had some wild, wet weather. It wasn't particularly cold, but if you were prepared, but I can imagine a lot of people would have had to endure like hypothermia, if they weren't prepared properly. As far as I think there's 12 different checkpoints along the way. Some of them that you hit a couple times, depending on it's kind of like a figure eight course. And yeah, you just the aid stations are well stocked, a lot of good food that the organizers provide there. And then of course you have your crew that can bring your supplies. For me, I had my wife crewing me; she crews all my races. So I was able to meet her. You can't actually see your crew until about the checkpoint 4, which again is about 60 or 70 kilometers. Evan would probably know better. He's done the race a couple times now. But honestly, a lot of the course was a bit of a blur. I don't remember a lot of details about the terrain. It was pretty rugged, pretty remote, a lot of climbing, like a ton of climbing, which in itself is a huge challenge on top of the distance that you're covering. So I'll throw it over to Evan to maybe add some more context or details on the course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Thanks,
What
Kev.
do you got?
I've done the course last year. They had to change the route this year because they couldn't get the permits to go into British Columbia. Because last year we were in basically hunting territory, which is not great. We were wearing reflective vests last year. We were all safe, but there were some voices in the hunting community that didn't necessarily enjoy us being in that area during hunting season, which I can understand as well too. Obviously, scaring off the animals while we're running down this forest road. Yeah, so the route changed not a lot this year, but it was probably the last third of the route changed significantly. The first 2/3 was pretty similar, like Kevin was saying. That elevation, it hits hard and fast, and like if you're not used to, there's so many people who weren't from mountain towns. Like there was one girl from Philadelphia, there was another guy from like Arkansas. Like we're talking areas that like they were literally training on treadmills to do this race. And yeah, the ruggedness of the terrain, and Brian Gallant, the race director for Sinister Sports, is, I'll say, notorious for his hills right before aid stations. And that definitely was the case in this race, without a doubt. I still recall leg 5 wondering why they changed the route to this, even though there was a cut line that they had to reroute us on. And it seriously, though, that last section was 6 kilometers and it took 2 hours. It was ridiculous. I don't know if you recall that section, Kevin, where we went literally up a quad track that literally like you would have had to have been riding on the front of the quad to not make it flip backwards. I don't know how anybody gets up that, but we were literally trudging up that. I was literally like hands and knees just crawling up this thing. One guy at the bottom of the hill literally threw his poles and said, "If we're going up there, I'm done." It was pretty rugged. And I mean, the crew aspect, like I had my wife Cassie with me, just similar to Kevin. Like my wife crews all my races, God bless her soul, for driving around for 4 days with very little sleep. I'm sure Kevin can attest to that with his wife. So crew is huge in these races. But the ruggedness of the terrain and the number of times that you don't see people for 30, 40K. So Kevin and I had a lot of time on the course together until he passed me on that mountain. And then you do come across runners, but you definitely get separated very quickly. So if you don't have pacers, and when we talk about pacers, we could pick up pacers at 135 kilometers, I think it was somewhere around there. So you can have somebody with you during that time, and there's certain sections they can drop, and it's usually a friend of yours that came along for the ride, or in my case, a friend that decided to pace 100 kilometers with me, which was very nice of him. I appreciate that. But it was the mud section when we got the weather was probably, like, when I say mud, it's like I'm going to take your shoe mud. That's the type of mud it was. It wasn't like the nice mud that you get on the trails that has like pine needles mixed in with it that just comes off your shoes. It was literally like suck your shoe off and take it with you, and it wants you more than you. And it was relentless, and it wasn't just like flat mud. It was like going up and down like mud tracks where you're literally like sliding down with your poles like you're skiing down mud. It was. And my crew and I figured we probably lost about 8 hours in that like 16 to 18 hour section that should have taken just because of the mud. It was ridiculous. But the route itself follows part of the Great Divide Trail. which is the one that runs all the way from Mexico to Canada. So we run quite a bit on that Great Divide Trail, which is absolutely breathtaking. The site, like the scenery, if you didn't get certain sections at night, is breathtaking. Like I was, from last year to this year, I actually swapped my days versus nights. That's how much faster I was moving initially until we hit the mud. I was like 8 hours ahead of my time from last year until that happened. So I got to see different parts of the course that I didn't get to see. And like we are in like remote sections that very few people get the opportunity to explore. And I think that's the cool thing about this race, is it puts you in these areas that are just like, you would have to know what you're looking for to go and find it, but it's absolutely incredible. Maybe I'll throw it back to Kevin to maybe talk about his kind of race logistics and planning going into the race.
Yeah, Kev, what do you got?
Is one.
Oh, I thought I
Got
got
you
no
there?
audio for you. There we go. Now we got you back. Go for it.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Yeah. So you end up you do. It does take some planning. You have the option of having drop bags if you don't have crew, but I had crew, so as my wife was able to meet me at all the kind of the key spots. So yeah, it's just when you always like kind of look forward to those aid stations, because that's the only way to conceptualize this kind of distance. Is you can't think about the finish line. You just think about, it's like all these, it's like 12 mini races, 12 checkpoints that you got to make it to. And they're as short as, maybe I think the shortest one, I can't recall, maybe 17 kilometers up to like mid 30 kilometers. So depending on the distance and then the time of day when you get there, it's really it varies throughout the course. There's a lot of variety in that time you spend between aid stations. Having crew is super important. I think it's, there are people that do it unsupported, uncrewed, and power to them. It would add a whole nother element of difficulty to do that, because when you get to an aid station, like my brain's not working at the best of times, and it's certainly not working 60 hours into an 80-hour effort. So having someone there to kind of think for you, because my wife asks what I want to eat. I'm like, I don't know, just give me something, put food in front of me, and I'll hopefully be able to eat it. Eating is like, how you're feeling is often directly correlated to what you're eating or what you're not, in a lot of cases, what you're not eating. So I was really lucky this time. I don't generally have stomach issues. I've only actually ever thrown up once during a race. But this race in particular, I didn't have any stomach issues. My stomach was pretty solid. I was able to eat the whole time. And like how you fuel is really dependent on what you're used to. I think with these distances, your overall effort, your output is a lot lower. So for me, I'm able to eat kind of more real food as opposed to kind of race specific nutrition like gels, which I really enjoy. Because I love to eat. Who doesn't like to eat? And you get to eat basically whatever you want, depending on what's available there. So, I was able to keep food down, eat. I was actually hungry the whole time, and being hungry is really important. Like if you stop being hungry, there's a problem, because now you're gonna have to force food into you, and it's really difficult to force food into your stomach or into your mouth, chew it and swallow it, as opposed to just being hungry and having that desire to want to eat, which I was fortunate enough to have. The race just kind of progressed along. Like when Evan and I linked up for a short section there, and then we separated kind of maybe after the third. I don't even remember where it was. And then I was able to have a couple of pacers. My wife paced me for a section, and then two young guys that I had met at a different race that I didn't know at all. In fact, one of them I'd never met agreed to come and pace me, which is always a bit of a risk. But I looked at these guys, and they were both young, fit guys, but it ended up being such an enjoyable experience just getting to know them. And they're actually both from Lithuania. They're here working as on I guess working permits, so they're just here for a year, and they happen to be avid runners. So for them just to even come experience this was really influential for them. I was glad to be part of it. When I got to know them, it helped pass an extreme amount of time together. So I was fortunate enough to just keep moving along the race, and eventually, how you do is really, it depends on you, and how you place in a race really depends on how other people are doing too. I was doing well but I was able to do better because people in front of me ended up dropping. And then there's a whole element of when you sleep. That's kind of still the big mystery in these 200-mile races is when do you sleep? How much do you sleep? For me, I slept 45 minutes on the first night and then 30 minutes on the third night. So I got a total of an hour and 15 minutes of sleep, which is a little bit less than I've done in the past with this distance. But I think that was definitely a good balance for me. I don't think you can make it through these races without sleeping at least once. At least I don't think I've ever heard of anyone being successful, like having performed well without sleeping. I think sleeping early or sleeping in general is just going to pay dividends later on in the race.
These I remember reading in I think it was On Combat, and Dr. Colonel Grossman was talking about the fact of like the U.S. Army did a test at one point in time just to see the efficacy of soldiers over time. And so they took 4 artillery crews over 4 days, and the first artillery crew got 8 hours of sleep a night, and the second one got 6, and the third one got 4, and the last one I think got 2, or might have been none. But it was after a single day, the fourth crew was down to like 40% efficiency, and the first crew was still up at like 85, 90. And so like sleep plays a huge role in the ability to maintain and endure through all these things. So like an hour and 15 minutes, it's crazy. That's awesome. Evan, you got any additional points on any of this?
Yeah, I'll just kind of throw just a little bit of differences from my plan from what Kevin's was there. My sleep plan was very structured. I'm not a dirt napper. I will never sleep in the dirt. I plan my sleep. I will trudge through holding my eyelids open before I will sleep in the dirt. That is just my MO. I will not do it. I'm very calculated on when I sleep. I want my sleeping bag. I want my eye mask. I want my headphones on, and I want to be cozy, and I just want to like have a really good sleep for whatever time I decide. So normally I sleep very similar to Kevin with races, but I was going to try something different this year, and I was going to run 100 miles, which would have been till I think checkpoint 7, which was like, I think it worked out to be like 168 kilometers because they had to change the route a bit, which is a little bit more. And I was going to sleep for 6 hours, and then I was going to go back out and run another 100 miles. That was my initial plan. When I came in, I was actually feeling quite good. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to sleep for 3 because I've done a lot of research on sleep, and I understand, sleep cycles and all those pieces. And it's like, I want a solid 3-hour sleep cycle so I can hit all of the sections of the sleep cycle and wake up and then go, knowing that I was doing really well. But what I didn't take into account was after I woke up from that nap, I now had the mud and the rain and all those other things to contend with. So I was going to be out there for another 8 hours. So I shortchanged myself knowing that, not knowing how much longer I'd be out there. So that was really kind of my downfall. I got really tired during one section, and the last section, I came into the car. I was moving really well, and I just said, I just need 10 minutes curled into the back with my dog curled up against me. Slept for 10 minutes, and I don't know what came over me in this race, but that last like 25K section. So my pacer had been with me for 75 kilometers up to that point, and he's a very strong runner. He's going to laugh when I tell this story, but we were normally a pacer is supposed to be the one setting the pace. Well, for some reason, 2 kilometers into that last 25 kilometers, I had something take over, and I started running up every single hill, charging the downhills. He couldn't keep up with me. I dropped him with 10 kilometers to go. And by the time I got to the finish, I gapped him by about 25 minutes on the course. So I don't know what happened. I mean, being that deep into a race, when we talk about finding that balance of the discomfort of your body and figuring out like how much further you can push yourself. The only thing I'm taking away from this race from an actual running perspective this time is that last 25 kilometers. Because if I can do that at the end, I'm like, what was I holding back during the rest of the race if I'm capable of something like that at that moment? So dropping your pacer is not common, I will say. It's usually not something that happens a lot of the time, but he was a good sport, and he lets me tell that story. So
I like this. Now we are coming up on 2 hours right now, and I just wanted to say thank you guys, because this is a fantastic combo. There's been so many points here that I think a lot of people could take away from it, and I don't want it to end, but unfortunately, it's going to have to at some point. Do you have any final thoughts? Anything at all over anything ultra endurance or racing, running, anything at all? Kevin, I hit you first.
Yeah, I mean, it's not for everyone, but I think if obviously if you're listening to this, you're probably curious or you're seeking some answers to some thoughts or questions that you might have. But I would just encourage people to give it a shot. Like you don't have to go and run 200 miles, but I think when you seek discomfort and you do hard things, you'll find extreme growth in that. And that's why I do it. I just love the challenge. I love surprising myself, and that to me, that's what it's all about. Is learning where your limits are, and there's such joy in that for me, and just the journey itself. Don't focus so much on the race, because if you're smart about it, you're not just gonna wake up and go race 200 miles. You're gonna build up to that, and it's just getting there is a journey. It takes years of kind of dedication and discipline. And if you do that, there's some really fruitful rewards that you can get out of it.
Yeah, and it's you say don't do that, but there's going to be somebody that does that, right? They're going to be like, you know what, 200 miles, yeah, let's go. They're going to show up. Evan, you got any final thoughts?
Yeah, as a coach, I love working with athletes that are what I call ultra curious. The ones that are maybe marathoners, people who've been running trails for shorter distances. I love working with those athletes. So if I'm happy to answer questions. This isn't a plug to come and coach with me. It's literally, I'm just very much like Kevin. Shoot me a message. I love talking about it so much that I will probably give you so much free information you won't know what to do with it. And the other piece to this too is when we talk about why we do it, like I can agree with every single thing that Kevin is saying is the reasons why. Being able to like bring these things back to real life. I mean, every time I run a race or a trail and I push myself hard, like I always say that little pieces of me die on the trail, but I take pieces of the trail with me. And it's so similar to everyday life. Like, don't be afraid of change. Change is scary, but remaining where you are is even scarier because you don't know what you don't know. If you don't open that door, you're not going to know what those other two doors are going to bring. And then when you open that next one, there's going to be 3 more doors. And if you don't open that first one, you're going to stay stuck. So that's my takeaway.
I love it. Sean, any final thoughts?
Yeah, sorry about the magnificent sunrise behind me. I'll say this, that I think there's 2 great things about ultra endurance racing. One is that you get to learn what you're not capable of, and you get to learn what you'd like to be capable of. And so between those 2 states, that's for you to figure out. And there's very few things in the world that will teach you what you can't do and what you want to do in such a pure sense. So don't hesitate to hit up either of the guys here on the call today to see if they've got any way to help you put your foot on a start line and learn more about yourself.
Bam. I got nothing to add except for the fact that somehow angelic light that is surrounding you, Sean, is fantastic. That's all I got to add. Again, I can't thank you guys enough. It's just been outstanding. I have learned a ton. I know anybody else that is going to be watching this is going to be picking up a ton as well. So as we all continue to learn, build, and grow, we'll see you all next week. Chimo.